Time for some CompTIA A Core 1 sample questions. We'll cover 5 in this video. And by the way, see the description for a sign-up link to get your free A Core 1 cram sheet. Let's go. Question 1. You are a technician working for a small business with 80 employees. You've been asked to set up a server that will be used to collect data and information about events from a network-connected host. Which of the following is the best solution? A. Print server. B. Mail server. C. Syslog. D. DNS server. I'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video and think about your answer starting now. And the correct answer is C, Syslog. The best solution in this scenario is to use a Syslog server, or more to the point, an R Syslog server. And that's going to allow us to collect data and information about events from any network-connected hosts. Quite often, it's going to be more than one. And that is the key element of this question. If you look through the paragraph, what you're really interested in here is collecting data and information about events from a network-connected host. I don't really care too much about whether it's a small business or a big business and how many employees. I do want to know what the best solution is, but this is a little bit of an easier question. This is the only proper solution on the list. And here we have a graphic showing how Syslog will work. On the left here, we have a monitored system. This is the system to be monitored. So we call it a client, and it generates logs. And just as an example, this host name is server-01.example.com. It generates the system events, the logs, whatever, and it runs the Syslog client. So that's known as the client. It's the system to be monitored. On the right-hand side, we have the Syslog server. This collects and stores logs that it grabs from the monitored system. And it can do this with multiple monitored systems. You might have a dozen monitored systems, and this Syslog server will grab all of that. And so it's a centralized Syslog server. It might be called something like syslog-receiver.example.com or whatever domain you're using. And so it's going to receive and process and store and manage all of the logs. It runs the Syslog daemon, and normally that's going to be our Syslog. And important for the exam, it listens on port 514 on both UDP and TCP on the transport layer. So port 514, though, you can change that. And I actually have a video on YouTube about setting up an R Syslog server. It's a 2-parter. And right here on this screen, about 3 minutes in, I'm showing the configuration. And you can see provides UDP Syslog reception, port 514, and provides TCP Syslog reception, 514. And so you can change the port if you want, and this is where you would do it. So check out that video. The link is in the description. Now, it's critical to know the correct answer, of course, but it's just as important to know why the incorrect answers are wrong. So let's go through those as well. Print server is incorrect. A print server deals with printing. It deals with the caching of documents. It deals with storing information for print jobs and spooling and dealing with printers and things of that nature. So that has to do with printing. It doesn't have to do with events from a network connected host. And the same goes for the mail server. That's going to deal with POP and SMTP and other protocols, the sending and the receiving of mail. And then we have the DNS server, domain name system server. That's going to take care of the resolution of domain names and host names to IP address. So those 3 are definitely out. The only one that really collects information and events from network connected hosts is a Syslog server. Awesome. 1 question down. If you like this content, check out my complete A Core 1 and Core 2 video course on O'Reilly. It's in the top 10 over there, and for a reason, the link is in the description. All right, question 2. A user calls you at the help desk to complain of slow startup times on a laptop. Which of the following is the most likely issue? A. RAM. B, storage drive, C, GPU, or D, BIOS? And I'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video and think about your answer starting now. And the correct answer is B, storage drive. This is the most likely cause of the slow system startup. If you were to see storage drive or hard drive or HDD or SSD, those are all also proper answers to this question. While it's rare that you'll see an HDD, meaning a hard disk drive or a mechanical drive, in a laptop anymore, SSDs or solid state drives can absolutely be the cause of slow startups and freezes. For example, an SSD might have low available space, there might be drive health degradation, maybe there's outdated firmware, all of which could cause slow startups. There's other possibilities as well that are not listed in the answers here, and they include a bloated operating system, which is very common with Windows. For example, background applications, antivirus suites, communication apps, games, and so on. Or there could be a corrupted operating system, or possibly the BIOS configuration needs to be changed. Maybe fast boot is not turned on. If that's not enabled, that can add several seconds to your boot time. However, SSD issues, storage drive issues, will be much more likely than BIOS configuration issues and can cause much longer delays. Now let's look at the key elements of this question. The first phrase is slow startup time. Slow startup time. And the next one is, what is the most likely issue? We're not looking down the line into rare stuff. We want the most likely issue. That's what we're looking for here. All right, incorrect answers. A, RAM, random access memory, that usually will not slow down the system. It might be incrementally slower if it's been underclocked or something like that, but that'll be just the entire experience with the computer. Instead, if there's a problem with RAM, you'll probably get a full failure and the system won't start. GPU, that's the graphics processing unit or the video card. And if this fails, you will probably have a problem on your display or you won't see anything at all, right? It's not going to slow down the system necessarily unless you have a driver issue. But that would not just be slow startup times, that would be a slow system all around, all the time when you use it. And then we have the BIOS, the basic input-output system, and the UEFI as well. Now, we mentioned there could be an issue in the BIOS. So the one I mentioned was fast boot. If that's not enabled, that could add several seconds to the boot time. So BIOS is actually a potential answer, but it's a bit more of a distractor. In the first question, the answer was easy. The other answers really made no sense. In this one, we have two answers that are possible, storage drive and BIOS. But BIOS is not as good for the reasons I mentioned before. So you have to go through the process of elimination and really know what each answer is and what it does. In my video course, I show exactly how to decrease Windows boot time and make your system faster. Excellent. Another question down, but those first two were easy. Let's get into it a little bit more. Question 3. A field technician is troubleshooting a premium 3-year-old laptop used by an executive. The user reports that while giving a presentation on battery power, the laptop suddenly shut down without any warning. It now refuses to power on at all. When the technician plugs in the official OEM AC power adapter, the laptop's charging indicator LED does not light up. The technician verifies that the wall outlet is functional by testing it with another device. Which of the following should the technician perform next to isolate the root cause? A. Disconnect the battery, plug in the AC adapter, and attempt to boot the laptop. B. Use a multimeter to verify the DC jack input voltage on the motherboard. C. Replace the laptop's internal charging circuit board, daughter board. Or D, perform a hard reset by holding down the power button for 30 seconds while completely unpowered. And feel free to pause the video. Be back in 3 seconds with the answer. And the correct answer is A. Disconnect the battery, plug in the AC adapter, and attempt to boot the laptop. This is really a best practice. Now, remember, the CompTIA troubleshooting methodology prioritizes isolating the problem using the least invasive and the lowest cost steps before replacing hardware. So essentially, CompTIA wants the simplest answer in most cases. If you have a completely dead, shorted, or severely degraded internal lithium ion battery, it can trigger the laptop's built in safety mechanisms. This can shut down the charging circuitry entirely, and that'll prevent thermal runaway. So when this happens, the laptop will refuse to draw power from the AC adapter or illuminate its charging LED at all. And so that's going to mimic a broken power brick or a dead motherboard or no power at the AC outlet. Disconnecting the internal battery forces the laptop to bypass the entire battery system and the battery's safety trip, and instead to run entirely on AC power. If it powers up, the battery is definitively the root failure and most likely needs to be replaced. And now you're in a tough spot. Always have backups, backup computers, backup laptops, batteries, whatever you think you might need. Let's look at the key elements for this question. The first is refuses to power on at all. Refuses to power on at all. Key phrase here. The other one, LED does not light up. That's even more important. If you were to plug something in, even if there's a little bit of an issue, normally the LED will light up some sort of color, right? If it doesn't light up at all, that's pretty telling. And then the last phrase is perform next. I'm not interested in doing things way down the line. I don't necessarily want to open up the laptop right now, and I might not even be able to. So what will I perform next? Key phrase there. All right, let's look at the incorrect answers. B is incorrect. That's use a multimeter to verify the DC jack input voltage on the motherboard. While using a multimeter to check the DC jack voltage is a valid troubleshooting step, it's something that you might do later. It requires disassembling the laptop's chassis maybe down to the motherboard layer so you can get at that jack circuitry. And these fail all the time just because people jam in the plug too hard and they can break or they can get disconnected. But CompTIA considers physical disassembly and circuit board probing to be a later stage step. Bypassing the battery requires removing a panel or removing just the battery itself, making it a more efficient next step. The other thing about this is if you do have to open the system, you might be voiding the warranty. And if you have warranty with another company, you might not be allowed to do that. Your standard operating procedures and your policies for your organization may say, no, you can't open the laptop. It has to actually be sent back for warranty repair. C is also out, and right off the bat, it's like, okay, well, replacing a board, that means opening it up. That's a really advanced thing. That's way down the line on troubleshooting and most likely not the problem, usually not going to be the problem. So we want to avoid that. Replacing hardware components like circuit boards should never be done until a technician has definitively verified that the component is broken. Bypassing the battery allows the technician to test the existing charging path first before you go through all that trouble. And D, perform a hard reset by holding down the power button for 30 seconds while completely unpowered. While a hard reset or a power reset or draining the flea power can resolve some motherboard logic hangs, and also it can solve a problem if capacitors were overcharged. It's highly unlikely to solve a total lack of and AC charging indicator lights when a severely faulted battery or a hardware short is suppressing the system power state altogether. So this is actually a great troubleshooting method if you do need to kind of clear the electricity out of the laptop, out of those capacitors, out of the motherboard, and you hold that power button down for 30 seconds to really clear it. So this last one is actually a great troubleshooting technique. It could solve problems for you, but generally the best practice is to get that battery out of the mix first and see if it'll boot just with the AC adapter. You can also try to perform a hard reset after that. If that didn't work, then you could move on to more in-depth stuff, which might incorporate opening up the laptop. Now, this was a lengthy question, but it really just came down to a couple of key phrases, as we mentioned, and also using the process of elimination. Eliminate those answers that you know are definitely incorrect right off the top. And so, replacing a board, that's not something you want to do first. The DC jack, if you have to get inside the laptop, not something you want to do first, right? However, if you absolutely dread longer questions like this, consider marking it and skipping it because you could do that in the exam. Just remember to return to it later. Okay, so a little bit of more difficult question. Let's keep the heat going. Question 4. A network administrator configures a new 802.11ax wireless router to improve local data transfer rates. While modern laptops achieve full throughput, several legacy IoT devices on the network can no longer associate with the SSID at all. Which of the following router configurations is the most likely cause of the issue? A. WPA3-personal is enabled exclusively. B. OFDMA has been disabled on the 2.4 gigahertz band. C. Channel width is restricted to 20 megahertz. Or D. MU-MIMO configuration is set to 4x4. Take a moment to pause the video. I'll be back in 3 seconds. And the correct answer is A. WPA3 personal is enabled exclusively. That's the most likely cause of the issue. CompTIA expects you to know backward compatibility limitations. 802.11ax, which is Wi-Fi 6, it standardizes the use of WPA3 encryption. However, many legacy or older IoT devices do not support WPA3 hardware or firmware requirements, and they cannot connect to a network unless the router is set to a transitional mode or combo mode. For example, WPA2 and WPA3 mixed. And you want to know how to log in to a wireless access point and make configuration changes like this. I highly recommend using an emulator if you can't get your hands on a WAP to work on. And there's links for a couple of those in the description. And I have a couple up here right now. This is the Asus Zen Wi-Fi AX. You can use this. It's an emulator. It looks just like what you'd see if you had a real one and you were to use your browser to connect to it. That's at demoui.asus.com. And then also at tplink.com/us/support/emulator, you've got emulators for just about everything that they make here. So check that out as well. And again, those links are in the description. Now, what are the key elements of the question? 802.11ax. You want to know this. You want to know how to configure this, but that's a key portion here. That is Wi-Fi 6. And then also legacy IoT devices. So the Internet of Things devices, legacy devices, older devices. Those are the key phrases, in my opinion, in this question. Let's look at the incorrect answers. B, OFDMA has been disabled on the 2.4 gigahertz band. Well, OFDMA is a Wi-Fi 6 efficiency feature. If you were to turn it off, it slows down performance, but it does not drop client connections altogether. So if your legacy IoT devices were able to connect, they would just maybe get slowed down. C, channel width is restricted to 20 megahertz. 20 megahertz is the standard, most compatible channel width for legacy and IoT devices. That's what they should have. That's what they should use. While you might use something wider for newer devices, only those will work. And D, MIMO configuration is set to 4x4. Higher spatial streams like these do not block older single stream devices from authenticating. So you will have backward compatibility in that case. The only question here is, do you have backward compatibility for the encryption type? And so we would want WPA3 and WPA2. So this time we had a shorter question, but the difficulty was there. If you don't know the various technologies listed in the distractors, in the incorrect answers, or the correct answer, then you could be in for trouble. Remember this, most of my students have the most trouble with the troubleshooting and the networking sections of the exam. So study. Last question. A technician is troubleshooting a workstation inside a small accounting office. The user reports that they can successfully browse public internet websites, but are completely unable to connect to the local accounting server. The technician documents the following network configurations. We have an internet gateway router, an accounting server, and a workstation. And feel free to pause the video and take a look at those configurations. Which of the following changes should the technician make to the workstation's configuration to resolve the local connectivity issue? A, change the IP address to 192.168.1.45. B, change the default gateway to 192.168.10.200. C, change the subnet mask to 255.255.255.0, or D, change the subnet mask to 255.0.0.0. Feel free to pause the video. Be back in 3 seconds with the answer. And the correct answer is C, change the subnet mask to 255.255.255.0. You don't have to know in-depth subnetting calculations for the A+ exam. That is reserved for the Network Plus and for other exams like the Cisco CCNA. But you should know your default subnet masks and your default network numbers and also port numbers and things like that. In this question, the workstation is experiencing a subnet mask mismatch. And you can see it right here. The workstation is set to 255.255.0.0, and the accounting server and the gateway are set to 255.255.255.0. Because the mask for the workstation is too broad, the workstation incorrectly assumes that the server is on a different remote network rather than its local broadcast domain. And it goes ahead and drops the direct communication with that accounting server. Aligning the workstation's subnet mask with the rest of the network should resolve the communication error. Now, in some cases, it might actually work intermittently, but in many cases, the workstation might be able to, say, connect to the accounting server, but the server will have a hard time connecting back. And that's because the workstation is considered to be on a much larger network than the server. So they will not be able to achieve a proper three-way TCP handshake. And that's due to conflicting data packet structures and especially the boundary expectations that we have here. Okay, and know this, the workstation does not have an issue with the gateway router because their math aligns perfectly for internet traffic. So for example, let's say the workstation wanted to connect to example.com on the internet. It would say, okay, what is example.com? and it's going to look out through DNS to find out what example.com is. That's not going to be local. It's going to be something on the internet. So the DNS server will take over, and the gateway will just say, oh yeah, you need the DNS server. That's fine. Go for it. Go have the DNS server do what you need it to do, which is to resolve example.com to its corresponding IP address. Once that's done, the workstation will just communicate with that IP from here. And the whole idea is it's a public IP, so it's going to be on a completely different IP network. So the subnet mask doesn't even come into play. The workstation will only look at its subnet mask to determine if the target is local or remote. And if it's looking for the accounting server, it says, oh yeah, that's going to be local, but yeah, we're going to have a big problem here because this is a much larger network effectively. And a hands-on alert, you should know how to modify the IP address, the subnet mask, the gateway address, and the DNS IP address settings on Windows, on macOS, and on Linux for the CompTIA A+ exams. So practice in a hands-on manner. All right, what are the key elements of the question? The connectivity statements. And we can see here, the user can successfully browse public internet websites, but cannot connect to the local accounting server. That's the key phrases right there. That tells you the problem. And also, you want to make sure you're looking at the configuration in depth here. Just a quick look at this tells you, workstation has the wrong subnet mask. It's that easy. So really, it's not that difficult of a question. It's very detailed, but it's very easy if you look for the key stuff. All right, incorrect answers. A says change the IP address to 192.168.1.45. That's going to place the workstation on an entirely different network or a different subnet, as the case may be. And we don't want that, obviously. That's going to break its ability to connect even to the gateway. So that's going to mess everything up, make the problem worse. And you have to remember about subnet masks. The proper subnet mask here, and by the way, if you see 192.168, that's going to mean to me Class C SOHO networks, small office, home office. And normally those will use 255.0. When you have a subnet mask like this, what the 255s mean is that these numbers are masked. That means that they are part of the network portion of the IP address, and they correspond. The first three octets are masked. They're 255.255.255. That's going to correspond to the network portion of the IP, which is 192.168.10. Right. The unmasked portion, the 0, corresponds to the host portion of the IP address, which for the gateway is .1, for the accounting server is .200. Now, if we apply that logic to the incorrect subnet mask here, you see what happens. 255.255 becomes the network portion, and so the workstation IP network portion is now 192.168, which becomes a much larger network. What we're supposed to have on this small accounting office is a SOHO type of network. We have 192.168.10, and the available IP addresses for us, the usable IPs, are going to be .1 through .254 for the hosts. But if we set the subnet mask to this by mistake, now our network is 192.168, and the mathematically available hosts are going to be 192.168.0.1 through .255.254. That's a huge network at this point, 65,534 hosts. We don't want that at all. That's just going to really mess things up. Now, if we change the IP address and change that third octet, that's just going to put us on a completely different network normally, or in this case, a different subnet. And so it's really just going to mess things up worse. Now we won't be able to reach anything. Answer B, change the default gateway to 192.168.10.200. The default gateway has to point to the gateway, the router, right? If we point it to the accounting server, that's just not going to make any sense. And once again, that workstation will not be able to connect out to hosts on the internet. So that'll break the user's internet access again. Change the subnet mask to 255.0.0.0, that's going to make the problem worse because it's going to widen the mask mismatch. Now we have a class A address, right? 255.255.255.0, that's class C. This one that's wrong is class B. This is class A. And that would say, okay, your network number is now 192. So that's just going to make the problem even worse. So really, this was a bit of an easier question if you really just look at the details. It's very lengthy, but not too difficult of a question. Now, you might encounter a question such as this in performance mode. Performance-based questions will ask you to actually drag and drop something, like a subnet mask or an IP address. Or it might have you type a command or do something similar like that in a hands-on fashion. These questions normally come first in the exam, so be ready for them. The best way to be ready? Practice in a hands-on manner. Well, that's it. If you enjoyed the content, then please like the video and subscribe to my channel. And don't forget, your free A+ Core 1 Cram Sheet is waiting for you in the description. It's actually a 14-page cheat sheet of awesomeness that I spent a good amount of time on, and I think you will benefit from. To learn more, check out my A+ Complete video course on O'Reilly. And again, the link for that is in the description. So that's it. I'm Dave, signing off. Until next time, thanks for watching.